Favourite time of the week with our favourite lady in the world, none other than the wonderful Megyn Kelly, host of the Megyn Kelly Show, Sirius XM in the United States, or podcast, YouTube, and all the rest of it around the world. How are you, Rockstar?
I'm great. How are you?
Excellent. Listening to your show as always this morning, our time, and you made a fascinating point that I think is really going to be one of the key moments in the lead up to the election between Trump and Biden. Now, it's great that Trump's out there revving up all the people who have always wanted to vote for him. But unlike 2020, when he's trying to defend a record, this is 2024 and he's trying to have the greatest comeback of all time. So he needs people who were there for him in 16, buggered off in 20 to come back. But you made a good point this morning that a lot of the bombast, a lot of the carry on, a lot of the, the screaming, the end of the democracy and the end of the world, and if you don't vote for me, this, that, and the other, it turns off suburban women. If suburban women don't turn up like they did in 16, Biden wins.
Yeah. I don't think he's remembering that enough. I think he's kind of writing them off as Biden voters, and now he's trying to drive up his numbers with certain minority groups. And it's true that if he wins Blacks and Hispanics by a certain percentage, that he doesn't have to worry about the suburban women, but it has to be a huge percentage. And most pollsters are saying, even though he's improved margins with those two minority groups, they're not going to be able to make up for the loss of women. Like, he's got to get a fair amount of the women who have left him. As you may be aware, it's the biggest voting bloc in America. So it's not a group you should just turn off. And Trump can win the women, because what do women care about? They care about safety. They care about the economy. So they're worried about the things that everybody else worry about: the border, inflation, the economy, and so on. He doesn't stick to those issues. As you know, he's got to go to the place that hurts on every issue, and the grievances and the threats about, what is going to happen if he doesn't get his way. And like tweeting out the stuff with showing Joe Biden tied up in a trunk. I just think it's unnecessary. And I know the base loves it. And they're like, yeah, F yeah, go get him. But you have to keep in mind how you win, right? How you win. These women don't like this behavior. And I realize there's a certain cohort of women who are diehard MAGA who are like, yeah, we love it. But the suburban women who used to vote Republican left for a reason. And it was Trump's temperament. That's what drove them away. They don't like him. So he either needs to pull a Joe Biden and stay in the basement and stop reminding people why they didn't vote for him in 2020, or while out there, he needs to be more disciplined, as he was for about 2 minutes when he launched this campaign early on.
I think a perfect example of Trump as just instinctively a good politician is that when Biden's doing the sort of, as Bill Maher said, the expendables of the Democratic Party, the people that are past at the former presidents and him in New York City, that he chose that moment was, okay, the way I'm going to have, and this term building up at the moment, it's called split screen, where literally one thing's happening in Republican world, one thing's happening in Democrat world, one is apparently a lie, and the other is the absolute truth, all that garbage. But the split screen at that moment was, if you're looking about priorities, as you said today, Biden's off doing sort of comedy podcasts thinking that, basically, sort of those voters will all end up replacing the other people who don't like his presidency. But then Trump's going to the funeral of a murdered police officer. Now, Trump's, when he's on those instincts, that's the guy who can absolutely beat his performance in 2016. And again, I just thought that the basic marketing guy, the guy who had the nous to know how to win or to turn a room, that's the guy who is the guy who can win. The other guy can't win.
Problem with Trump is he doesn't have discipline in this lane. This kind of goes back to the question I asked him at that debate that he hates so much. He continues to bring it up 9 years later. It wasn't really about women. It was about temperament.
Yes.
You have the temperament of a man who could be president. And it's the reason Trump didn't get reelected in 2020, right? People had been exposed to his nonstop drama. Everything's about him. They have to think about Trump all the time instead of thinking about themselves. Just all the antics around COVID. It was just a lot. It was a lot. And I think they needed a break from him. And him going off screen has been good for him. People remember the policies, which were excellent for the most part, and not the drama. And now he's got a lot to complain about, and I understand it. I complain about it for him some days, but notwithstanding all that, he's got to stay more disciplined. It's just not how he's built. I told you after I interviewed him in September, the very first thing he said was to ask me about the debate question. And then in the middle of the interview, he raised that debate question. And then when we parted, he raised the debate question. Like, he gets these obsessions and he can't get off of them. And so people don't give a damn about that stuff. And they don't want to hear about that stuff. They want to hear about themselves, their own lives, which Trump knows. I mean, he really is politically, he's a genius. He just doesn't have the discipline to check his temper and temperament to stay on message.
Also, the thing I love about America is that you can have a second act, right? You can find a way to come back from adversity or being cancelled or being rejected by the voters. But part of that is to show you've learnt your lesson. Now, also what happens is that because you and I are even having this conversation in what are assumed to be, Trump-friendly locations that somehow we're wishing him to lose. No, this is, how do we say this? People who are trying to point out the problems before they become the problems. But there's this sort of purity test that is inevitably there. And it's unless you loved him from the escalator to today uninterrupted, you're the back of the bus.
I really don't have time for any of that. It's like, okay, if that's your jam, cool. You shouldn't be watching me, that's for sure. I don't think you should be watching Paul Murray, who's an honest broadcaster. You find somebody else. Find somebody who's a Trump sycophant. There's tons of those out there. God love you. Go for it. I get it. Some people just want to kind of hear, my guy's great, no matter what the record is. It's like, I'm a New York Yankees fan. I don't want to hear the bad news about the Yankees. I don't care if it's true or not. That's a thing. But if you want actual honest takes on the news and reporting of facts about the candidates and objective analysis, irrespective of who the anchor is rooting for, then you have to seek out a different brand, or you may wind up misled. You may wind up looking a little silly because you don't have real information. And I'm not talking about NBC News. Our real information and our fact check is that the 4 criminal trials are not election interference. There's your handy fact check. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about real analysis of it is not helpful to Trump's long-term goals to go out there and say these incendiary things every other day that turn into a new campaign ad. There are some people in the core voting blocks he needs that might be turned off by it. And he's got to be a little careful about that, especially when there's another meaningful alternative on the ticket this year in several swing states. And that's RFKJ, 100%. To whom those disaffected Republicans might, maybe not likely, but might turn.
Yeah, 100%.